Assalamu alaikum students. Today we are starting a new topic, that is prejudice and discrimination. लेकिन हस्बे मामूल आज का लेक्चर शुरू करने से पहले पिछले लेक्चर को रिव्यू करते हैं. In the previous lecture we talked about attitude change through persuasive messages and we talked about message and audience variables. और उससे पहले लेक्चर में हमने source variables को डिस्कस किया था. As far as message variables are concerned, that factor is basically concerned with how the message is presented as well as the content of the message. There are a few factors which are important in the effectiveness of how the message will be communicated and will be having an effect on the audience. One factor was vivid versus non-vivid images. So it means that if you provide factual information to the audience, it would have a different impact on the audience if it is presented in a different way, and that is through image projections. And studies have shown that when facts and figures are presented and when audience are stimulated by that particular method, then it would have more persuasive effect. लेकिन इसके लिए ये भी ज़रूरी है कि the source must be credible, because if you are giving figures that so and so people, for example, died due to nicotine smoking and due to drug abuse, then the source which said that should also be credible enough for that impression of the persuasion. उसके बाद हमने ये डिस्कस किया कि the things can be also presented in a different way, that is through different pictures and images and diagrams. And we found out that if you are projecting images and if you are persuading people through presentation of images and diagrams, then the message must be very congruent with those images. Otherwise, people are more likely to remember the image rather than the message. And we also found out that if both of these techniques are used jointly, that if facts and figures are presented along with presentation of some images, then it would have a more enduring effect. Another factor which is important as far as message variable is concerned is fear element. And we found out that fear element is basically inducing fear in people so that they would be compelled to use the product whatever has been suggested to people. And different organizations, individuals, governments and advertisement companies use that very frequently. और इसमें हमने कुछ मिसालें भी ली थी. फॉर एग्जांपल, अगर सिगरेट स्मोकिंग का इश्तिहार है तो आप इस तरह का मैसेज देते हैं और लोगों को फियर कैसे प्रोड्यूस करते हैं कि फॉर एग्जांपल निकोटिन स्मोकिंग कुड शॉर्टन लाइफ एक्सपेक्टेंसी. और उसके साथ तो फिर एक पहला एलिमेंट इम्पॉर्टेंट है कि वेदर यू आर प्रोजेक्टिंग some evidence-based information or you are projecting it through the presentation of some images. Then we talked about humor as a very important element of persuasive messages. And studies have shown that if the source is injecting humor into speech, then the source becomes quite likable. और उसकी वजह ये है कि people are more inclined to listen to humor than to serious narrations. And another element which is important as far as message variable is concerned, the use of one-sided or two-sided messages. When people use two-sided messages, then it leaves an impression of the audience that the person who is communicating is a fair-minded and objective person. Another effect that two-sided messages could have is that it would have attitude inoculation effect. That if you are presenting weak elements of your opponent, then when people will be presented with those elements in future, they will not be affected by that. So in that way, you use those weak elements of your opposition in a defensive way. Another element which is important in the message variable is repetition of the message. और हमने इसको mere exposure effect के तहत explain किया था, which states that if you are having repeated exposure of things, then you develop a positive attitude toward that particular object, even though you would not have a direct relationship with the effectiveness of that particular object. लेकिन इसके साथ हमने ये भी देखा कि repetition जो है वो एक certain limits के अंदर होनी चाहिए, because if you are having a negative impact about that particular object जिसकी एडवर्टीजमेंट हो रही है, तो उसकी रिपीटेड एक्सपोजर से आप उसकी तरफ और नेगेटिव हो जाएंगे. एज कंपेयर टू दैट, इफ यू हैव पॉजिटिव फीलिंग टुवर्ड्स सम ऑब्जेक्ट, देन रिपीटेड एक्सपोजर वुड हेल्प. तो मैसेज वेरिएबल्स में हमने कुछ फैक्टर डिस्कस किए, एंड दीज फैक्टर्स वर फैक्ट्स वर्सेस इमेज प्रोजेक्शन, fear, humor, one-sided or two-sided arguments, and finally repetition. Then finally we talked about audience variable, that who are the audience to whom you are communicating, what is the importance of audience, or audience किस तरह के होने चाहिए so that the persuasive messages would be more effective. One element that we discussed in audience factor was mood. If the person is already in a good mood, then this is more likely that his attitude will change as compared to that person who is in a negative mood. And the reason is that if a person is in a negative mood, that person thinks that something is wrong with the environment. And then as the consequence, the person starts processing information in a more rigorous way. As compared to that, the person who is in a happy mood wants to retain his happy mood on the one end, and secondly, that person does not process that information very rigorously. The reason is, जो पहले मैंने कही कि एक तो ये बात है, they want to maintain their happy mood, and the second thing is that they are accepting the peripheral route more easily. And the peripheral route is when the communication does not have a direct impact, but unconscious जो उसके factors होते हैं, they could also have an influence on the person who is being persuaded. Then we also talked about involvement issue of the audience. If you think that you are personally involved with that particular issue, yeah, this issue is very much important to yourself, then central route will be more acceptable to the audience. As compared to that, if you think that it is publicly more important and maybe your attitude will be scrutinized by public, then you are more influenced by the peripheral cues also. For example, attractiveness of the source or length of that particular persuasive message. Then finally we talked about individual differences, और हमने दो individual differences का जिक्र किया था. One was need for cognition. Need for cognition states that how much effortful you are at the moment when you are being persuaded. If you are more effortful, then you would like the central direct route for advertisement or persuasion. And if you are having low need for cognition, then you may be accepted, you may be more influenced by the peripheral route. And then finally we talked about age variable. Previous studies showed that younger people are more susceptible to attitude change because they are in the formative years of development. Their attitudes are still being formed, and they are maybe like for the first time exposed to social and political issues. But the later theories showed that younger people as well as older people are more prone to attitude change. The reason is that they are having more role transitions in their life. और उनकी रोल चूँकि ट्रांजिटरी स्टेज से गुजर रहे होते हैं, तो उनके एटीट्यूड भी चेंज होने के ज़्यादा चांसेस होते हैं. एज कम्पेयर टू बोथ ऑफ दीज ग्रुप्स, adult people from starting emerging adulthood to 50s and 60s, they are tough as far as attitude change is concerned because they have relatively stronger attitudes. So this was all about attitude change. Today we will start a new topic as I mentioned before, and that is prejudice and discrimination. इससे पहले कि हम नया टॉपिक शुरू करें, एक तो छोटी सी एक्टिविटी कर लेते हैं. क्योंकि आपने पिछला चैप्टर पढ़ लिया है एटीट्यूड और एटीट्यूड चेंज, तो इससे हम एक छोटी सी एक्टिविटी करने के बाद थोड़ी सी उसकी अप्लाइड सोशल साइकोलॉजी लैब करेंगे और उसके बाद जो नया टॉपिक है वो शुरू करेंगे. तो पहले तो मैं आपसे चाहूँगी कि यू रेट योर एग्रीमेंट ऑन अ 7-point स्केल इन रेफरेंस टू दिस स्टेटमेंट. एंड द स्टेटमेंट इज, illiteracy is a serious problem that requires attention. So what is your attitude toward that particular statement? And you rate your attitude on a 7-point scale, where 7 indicates you strongly agree and 1 indicates you strongly disagree. तो मैं थोड़ी देर वेट कर रही हूँ कि आप अपना रेस्पॉन्स जो है वो 7-point स्केल पे रेट करें. एंड आई वुड रिपीट, on this 7-point scale, 7 means strongly agree and 1 means that you strongly agree to this statement, and I repeat, the statement is illiteracy is a serious problem that requires attention. अब आपने अपने आप को रेट कर लिया होगा, यानी अपने एटीट्यूड को रेट कर लिया होगा 7-point scale पर. Now I ask you one question. Have you personally done anything to help reduce literacy? Yes or no? सिर्फ आपने yes or no में जवाब देना है. अब many of you, I think, would have replied in no, that you would not have done anything personally to reduce illiteracy from the country. But many of you will agree that illiteracy is a serious problem in Pakistan and that requires attention. So what was the purpose of that activity? The purpose of that activity was to experience cognitive dissonance. So that is inconsistency between people's attitude and behavior. तो ये एक छोटा सा एक्सपीरियंस हमने किया था कि when people have a cognitive dissonance, maybe when they observe their behavior, then they sometime change their attitude also. अब थोड़ी सी applied social psychology lab की बात हो जाए, that how we can apply and how do we apply principles of attitude and attitude change theories. First thing is that people are using attitude principles and behavioral change principles in creating image of maybe politicians and organizations. And different advertisement companies have made frequent use of that by projecting a positive image of politicians, and public relation firms have played an important role in that particular process. For example, public relation firms tell politicians that how to create a favorable image and how to project a favorable image among public, and they tell them how to actually walk, how to talk, how to speak, how to dress up and how to make a different hairstyle. और ये देखा गया है कि जब कोई पॉलिटिशियन इलेक्शन में कामयाब होता है तो साइकोलॉजिस्ट की खिदमात भी कई दफ़ा हासिल की जाती हैं, सो दैट दे आर टोल्ड दैट हाउ दे विल बी बिहेविंग एंड हाउ दे शैल बी बिहेविंग इन द पब्लिक. उन्होंने क्या करना है जिससे दे कुड present a favorable impression on public. And the most effective strategy that has been found so far in creating a positive impact on people is just behaving like them and mixing in them. आपने देखा होगा कि ये पॉलिटिशियंस को दिखाया जाता है कि वो जब कहीं कोई आफत आती है, जैसे अर्थक्वेक हुआ, और वहाँ पर जो है वो पॉलिटिशियंस जा रहे हैं और हर कोई इस कोशिश में होता है कि उसकी तस्वीर बन जाए और टीवी पर आ जाए या अखबारात की जीनत बन जाए. और फिर दिखाया जाता है कि जुमा की नमाज में वो लोगों से गले मिल रहे हैं, एंड स्पेशली फोटोज आर टेकन फॉर 2-3 इंसिडेंट्स जबकि वो लोगों से गले मिल रहे हैं. फिर ईद आती है, छोटे बच्चों को मोहल्लों में जाकर ईदी तकसीम कर रहे हैं. तो इस तरह के जो हैं वो स्पेशल प्रोजेक्शंस जो हैं वो दिखाई जाती हैं टू क्रिएटिंग अ फेवरेबल इमेज. प्रिंसिपल्स ऑफ एटीट्यूड एंड बिहेवियर चेंज आर वेरी फ्रीक्वेंटली एम्प्लॉयड. ये आप नोट करें. और I would like you to see different advertisements in newspapers and in TV programs. TV programs के दौरान और न्यूज़ में जो मुख्तलिफ politician और जो ministers हैं, they try to create a good impact on people. And then the second use of principles of attitude and behavior change is in education. Although we use different words for having a different kind of persuasion. For example, propaganda and education are two different terms. Propaganda means that you try to influence other people's behavior through using different techniques. And usually propaganda is a negative connotation. It is used in negative terms. As compared to that, in education, you try to change people's attitude, but by providing evidence and academic data. But recently it has been seen that the distinction between propaganda and education has become blurred. The reason is that hidden propaganda has been seen by the establishment and governments in textbooks and academic data. For example, आप नोट करें कि टेक्स्ट बुक्स में, और वो बेशक हमारे मुल्क की लिखी हुई हैं या दूसरे मुल्कों की लिखी हुई हैं, there is frequently an attempt that the current government is presented in a very favorable way. और जब तक वो गवर्नमेंट नहीं जाती उसकी बुराई कभी टेक्स्ट बुक्स में नहीं लिखी जाती, लेकिन इसके बरक्स पिछली हुकूमतों की बुराइयों का और नेगेटिविटी का बहुत जिक्र होता है. Similarly, academic data is used and exploited in education by influencing people's mind about other nations, about ethnic minorities, about different races and about different sexes, that is male and female. Then we also find that attitude change practically कैसे होती है? Usually it is done by successive approximation, especially when people are having very strong views or people are very committed in their views, in their attitude. तो फिर उसको चेंज करने का ये तरीका होता है कि आप प्रैक्टिकली कैसे करें. आप you take the weak element of some attitude and try to change that first. So it is in step by step. So it is successive approximation. You gradually go to the strongly held attitude and then you try to change it at the end. So this slide was basically about the practical use of persuasive methods and how people in everyday life try to change other people's behavior. So now we start today's topic, that is prejudice and discrimination. आपने इंग्लिश लैंग्वेज में बहुत सारे प्रोनाउंस पढ़े होंगे, यूज़ किए होंगे, और इस तरह से बहुत सारे प्रोनाउंस जो हैं वो उर्दू लैंग्वेज में और दूसरी लैंग्वेजेस में यूज़ होते हैं टू डिफरेंशिएट बिटवीन यू एंड अदर पीपल, टू डिफरेंशिएट बिटवीन योर ग्रुप, दैट इज़ इन ग्रुप एंड आउट ग्रुप. सो द पर्पस ऑफ दीज प्रोनाउंस जो होता है बेसिकली दैट इज़ डिस्क्रिप्शन. लेकिन व्हाट हैपन्स that the pronouns of English, for example, us and them, indicate the degree of social and psychological space between the speaker and the social group to which these pronouns refer. So basically जो है that show a distance between different pronouns. For example, us, we are less distant as compared to them and they. And social groups associated with the distancing they and them pronoun labels are valued much less than those with the embracing we and us labels. अब ये जो हम they label use करते हैं to designate it to the outer group, to other people, और we और us use करते हैं हमारे लिए और हमारे ग्रुप के लिए जिसको हम अपने से नज़दीक समझते हैं, which may be called in group. तो जब हम ये pronouns use करते हैं, usually they mean people who are not like us, and we strongly use different statements which indicate that, for example, they are very dangerous. वो बड़े खतरनाक लोग हैं, वो अच्छे नहीं हैं. They are dirty, ugly and smelly. They are disrespectful. Sometimes we feel sorry for them, but we don't want them to be around us. And sometimes they could be good people, but still they are not like us, they are quite different from us. So this chapter and this topic is about the social psychology of intergroup intolerance. Why people belonging to different groups are not tolerant of each other. I would like to define first what is prejudice and discrimination. Prejudice is actually a feeling bias and discrimination is an action bias. Prejudice is a negative attitude towards the members of specific social groups, and that has an affective component in that, evaluative component. While discrimination, as I stated before, is a biased act, action, behavior, is a negative behavior directed toward members of social groups who are the object of prejudice, and it has a behavioral component in that. Prejudice and discrimination are strongly based on stereotypes one has about members of another group. And stereotypes are beliefs about the personal attributes shared by people in a particular group or social category. So this has a cognitive element in that. Our stereotypes are cognitive beliefs that are against other, about the unfavorable qualities of other groups. And stereotypes heavily determine our prejudice and discrimination. Now we'll discuss what are factors which are responsible for prejudice and then discriminatory behavior. So there are three kinds of factors which are important in prejudice and discrimination. First is cognitive sources, या cognitive factor, and second is emotional sources, and the third one is social sources. As far as cognitive sources are concerned, we will be talking about how people categorize people. As far as emotional sources are concerned, we will be talking about two psychoanalytic theories, scapegoating and authoritarianism, or authoritarian personalities. And then social sources are concerned, we will be talking about social inequalities, social identity and intergroup competitions. So today we will be talking about cognitive and emotional sources of prejudice and then discriminatory behavior. As far as cognitive sources of prejudice are concerned, we have a strong tendency that we categorize our world to perceive it in a coherent and organized way. और हमने ये पहले भी डिस्कस किया था जब हमने सोशल कॉग्निशन की बात की थी कि we tend to organize our social world by categorizing it into different groups. अब बायोलॉजिस्ट क्या करते हैं? बायोलॉजिस्ट क्लासिफाई plants and animals, and psychologists classify people into different groups. Usually people are classified according to different social roles and their designations, for example, gender or sex, you can say, education, social class, urban or rural class, and then ethnicity. Ethnicity and sex are powerful ways of categorizing people. In USA, people of wide cultural and ancestral heritage are defined on the basis of just color. People who are having multicultural perspective there, people who belong to different nations, they are just categorized on the basis of color. And wider varying ancestry is just defined as either black or white. और अगर हम अपने मुल्क में देखें तो हमारे यहाँ ज़्यादा कोई minorities और majorities का इतना तस्वर नहीं है, because we are not a multicultural society as such. लेकिन हमारे यहाँ जो है categorization आपको नज़र आती है, and that categorization is on the basis of ज़ात and brotherly. By itself categorization is not prejudice, क्योंकि categorization is very important for understanding of our social world. Categorization तो बहुत ज़रूरी है, हमें करनी पड़ती है चीज़ों को समझने के लिए, चीज़ों को organize करने के लिए, but it provides obviously a basis for prejudice. Because when you categorize people into different groups and categories, then you behave differently toward them. And studies have shown that those people who feel their social identity keenly, they tend to categorize people as us or them. So this is in fact social identity theory, that those people who are very clear, very keen to maintain their identity, they are more concerned with the categorization. This categorization of people can lead to homogeneity effect of outgroup. So merely assigning people to different social groups can create outgroup homogeneity effect, and homogeneity effect actually maintains that you would perceive outer group as more similar to each other than to yourself, and we think that they all are alike while we are diverse. तो हमारे यहाँ जो हमारा ग्रुप है उसमें तो कुछ differences और different elements और characteristics पाए जाते हैं, लेकिन ये जो आउट ग्रुप के लोग हैं ये सारे किसी न किसी नेगेटिव ट्रेट में यूजुअली दे आर अलाइक. अब कभी ये भी हो सकता है कि देयर कुड बी इन ग्रुप होमोजेनिटी इफेक्ट, बिकॉज यूजुअली देयर इज आउट ग्रुप होमोजेनिटी इफेक्ट दैट दे ऑल ग्रुप्स आर अलाइक किसी भी नेगेटिव डायमेंशन में. फॉर एग्जांपल, दे ऑल आर अगली, दे ऑल आर डेंजरस, दे ऑल आर डिसरिस्पेक्टफुल एंड सो ऑन. तो क्या कभी इन ग्रुप होमोजेनिटी इफेक्ट भी हो सकता है? तो इन ग्रुप होमोजेनिटी इफेक्ट यूजुअली तब होता है व्हेन यू आर अ माइनॉरिटी समवेयर. फॉर एग्जांपल, I have personally noted that when people go abroad for studying, तो वहाँ पे वो जो डिफरेंट नेशनैलिटीज़ के लोग इकट्ठे होते हैं, फॉर एग्जांपल पाकिस्तानीज, इंडियंस, चाइनीज़, कोरियंस एटसेट्रा, दे फील सम टाइम लाइक इन ग्रुप, और उनको इन ग्रुप होमोजेनिटी इफेक्ट वहाँ पे कायम होता है. दे थिंक दैट दे ऑल आर अलाइक, और उसके अलाइक होने की कोई ना कोई वजह होती है. फॉर एग्जांपल दे ऑल आर एशियंस, एंड आई हैव सीन पर्सनली दैट पीपल who are Pakistani, they feel very much near as far as cultural factors are concerned with Indian people, और उनके साथ उनकी बाहर जाके बड़ी अच्छी दोस्ती हो जाती है, और वो सारी जो animosity वगैरह है वो भूल जाते हैं. So the purpose of describing this example is that sometime on the basis of circumstances people could have that in-group homogeneity effect also. So when people categorize people into groups, then actually it sets a stage for having different beliefs for them, and it sets a stage for having stereotypes for them, because जब हम categories बनाते हैं लोगों की, तो we try to and we start perceiving them according to different personalities, according to different abilities and capabilities. So stereotypes are beliefs about people that put them into categories and they don't allow for individual variation. जब हम ये देखते हैं कि that person belongs to one particular nation, and if we have already developed some stereotype for that particular nation, तो हम समझेंगे कि ये भी बिल्कुल उसी तरह से होगा. We would not allow any kind of variation from that particular stereotype. जैसे maybe many people in Pakistan would believe that Jews are very cunning, and if they come across a person who is very nice and who is Jew, so it will be difficult for them to believe that they met a person who is Jew and is nice at the same time. So they would try to stick to their previous stereotype, and that is they are cunning. What is the function of stereotype thinking? Stereotype thinking actually has many functions. First of them, जो सबसे जो important चीज़ है, the apparent quality, the apparent characteristic of stereotype thinking is their quickness. It provides us actually with rich and distinctive information about people we do not personally know, and that was pointed out by Gilbert and Hickson in 1991. We readily make a conclusion about a person for whom we have a stereotype, और हम किसी डेप्थ में या उसके बारे में कोई और इन्फॉर्मेशन लेने की ज़रूरत महसूस नहीं करते. सो वी वेरी क्विकली हैव अ रेडीमेड आइडिया अबाउट दैट पर्टिकुलर पर्सन, और ये रेडीमेड आइडिया जो है वो बेस करता है हमारे स्टीरियोटाइप्स पर. सो व्हाट इट लीड्स टू, इसका क्या होता है? व्हेन यू आर रेडली रिस्पॉन्डिंग टुवर्ड्स सम पर्सन, देन वी हैव अ फ्रीइंग अप ऑफ कॉग्निशन. सो इट अपीयर्स टू फ्री अप कॉग्निशन फॉर अदर टास्क. तो हमारा जो है वो टाइम बच जाता है. वी डू नॉट रिक्वायर कॉग्निटिव एफर्ट टू गेट इन्फॉर्मेशन अबाउट दैट पर्टिकुलर पर्सन वी हैव मेट, और हम उसके बारे में एक रिप्रेजेंटेटिव ह्यूरिस्टिक की मदद से जल्दी से एक फैसला जो है वो कर लेते हैं. सो इट इज़ readily available information that is already in our mind, and through representativeness heuristic that person is representing a particular group, a particular nation, a particular ethnicity, we just have a conclusion formed for that particular person. So this resource preserving effect has an evolutionary basis. According to Gilbert in 1989, he pointed out this. Why does it has evolutionary basis? It has an evolutionary basis because it will save our time and we will fix our energy on other important tasks. When we are filtering social judgments through stereotypes, it actually results in ignoring information that is relevant but inconsistent with the stereotype. तो इसका नुकसान ये होता है कि अगर आपको ऐसी इन्फॉर्मेशन भी मिलती है which is actually inconsistent with the stereotype, जैसे मैंने अभी ज्यू की नाइसनेस की मिसाल दी, तो we just ignore that information which is actually relevant, but we ignore it because it is inconsistent with our stereotype. एक बड़ी इंटरेस्टिंग स्टडी मैं आपके सामने मेंशन करना चाहूँगी, and that study was conducted in UK. It was a research actually to explore how far the perceptions of mental health professionals are derived from their cultural stereotypes in Britain. और इसमें मेंटल हेल्थ प्रोफेशनल्स जो थे उनका एक फोकस ग्रुप बुलाया गया. फोकस ग्रुप में ये होता है कि यू टेक ग्रुप ऑफ पीपल हु आर रेलिवेंट टू दैट पर्टिकुलर इशू, और आप उनसे किसी टॉपिक पे बातचीत करने के लिए कहते हैं, और फिर हर एक के नैरेटिव्स जो हैं उसमें आपके सामने आते हैं कि व्हाट आर ओपिनियंस ऑफ डिफरेंट पीपल हु आर इन्वॉल्वड इन दैट पर्टिकुलर फोकस ग्रुप, एंड दैट ग्रुप इज एक्चुअली फोकसिंग ऑन सम इशू. तो उन्होंने मेंटल हेल्थ प्रोफेशनल्स का एक फोकस ग्रुप बुलवाया, एंड दैट स्टडी वाज कंडक्टेड बाय बर इन 2002, और इट इज pointing out toward different stereotypes that mental health professionals who are in UK and maybe in many other countries about alien cultures. And here I would be describing some narratives. Narratives क्या होते हैं? जो कि statements उन्होंने as such बोली होती हैं, वैसी की वैसी हम पेश कर देते हैं. So here I will be presenting some narratives from mental health professionals who are working in UK. और इससे पहले मैं ये mention करना चाहूँगी कि यूके में पाकिस्तानी और साउथ एशियन पॉपुलेशन की हाई कंसंट्रेशन है, और उसके बावजूद जो है मेंटल हेल्थ प्रोफेशनल्स वर फाउंड टू हैव मेनी स्टीरियोटाइप्स अगेंस्ट पीपल हु बिलोंग टू साउथ एशियन रीजन, और ज़्यादातर इसमें पाकिस्तानी के बारे में बात की हुई है. सो फर्स्ट नैरेटिव इज अबाउट ट्रेडिशनल फेमिनिन रोल्स. सो वन नैरेटिव इज देयर, आई थिंक द रोल्स ऑफ वुमेन, द एक्सपेक्टेशंस, and because there is quite a lot of pressure to conform, so South Asian women might find themselves quite isolated. So they think that because of cultural pathology, South Asian women are very isolated. Another person said that my concept of the Asian woman is that they are very much in the dark, almost on the corners. So this is their perception, that they do not have a lead in their family, and Asian females, especially South Asian females, are having a very submissive role in their family. So they are pointing out, again I would repeat, to the pathology of South Asian cultures. Another stereotype is about cultural conflicts, and I would again repeat three narratives here. One narrative is by mental health professionals. If they adapt to British culture, and perhaps if their Asian or ethnic values are not so rigid, then it may be easy for them. The second narrative is they all try to carry on their tradition in an alien culture. So you can see how is their conflict. I am amazed that they are not all depressed really. I think that they should all go home. They don't fit here. The third narrative is they are swamping the country. They are just descending to these areas. They are probably thinking that streets are paved with gold, going to be mightily disappointed. Up here they are pointing out that the only way to resolve conflict between different Asian and white people living in UK is that either they should go back to their home, or they should adopt Western culture and leave their rigid, inferior Asian culture. This stereotype is about arranged marriage, and one mental health professional said, I think it will be very lonely. I didn't realize how many people lose their own families when they go into an arranged marriage, and their husband's family is more their family. It must be horrible. So before thinking that arranged marriage could work effectively in a different culture, they are considering that arranged marriage is very damaging. So this is very questionable, that how could people who belong to different cultures decide that a particular custom of one particular culture is very damaging, because they are not living there and they don't have to go through the experiences of arranged marriage themselves. And the last one, stereotypes are about expectations and awareness. So what do they expect from Asian people, and what is the awareness they found in South Asian people? One narrative was that we would be really depressed at some conditions that some cultures are faced with, but they just get on with it. So they are actually wondering that how people who belong to so socially and psychologically damaging culture, they could be mentally healthy. Another narrative was that I think Asian women are socially conditioned to take all those blows. They are the ones to take all the heavy load, they can't say they are depressed. Only when they come to a place like this is when we start to see symptoms. So again, they are saying that they even didn't know that they are not mentally healthy unless they came here and we observed these symptoms. So they are really surprised that Asian women who are left in the corner of the family house, they do not have a say in different matters of the family affairs, and they are having a very maybe negative life in South Asian families. How they are mentally healthy and why don't they get depressed? So you saw that people who are living in different cultures, they would have different kinds of stereotypes for people who belong to alien or different cultures. और इसकी तरह की स्टडीज़ जो हैं बहुत सारे मुल्कों में कंडक्ट हो चुकी हैं, और एक और ऑब्जर्वेशन जो मैं आपसे शेयर करना चाहूँगी यहाँ पर कि people who are working as mental health professionals in Western countries, they are more likely to diagnose Afro-Caribbean and Asian people as schizophrenic and manic. So they are more likely to diagnose them with having mania and schizophrenia. और इसके ऊपर भी काफ़ी रिसर्चेस हुई हैं कि why is it like that? Because is it due to some genetic reasons that more Asian people are suffering from schizophrenia and mania? And similarly, is it true for Afro-Caribbean people? और अगर आप Afro-Caribbean और Asian का comparison करते हैं, तो more people who are of Afro-Caribbean origin, they are diagnosed having schizophrenia and mania as compared to Asian people. इसके बरक्स more white people are diagnosed having depression. So the reason is that most of the Western people think that as far as depression is concerned, a person feels depressed when he is more self-aware, or the person like having white origin, they are more sophisticated to be depressed as compared to Afro-Caribbean origin people who can't be depressed because they are high all the time and they are having strange and odd and bizarre behavior. Due to that, they are diagnosed as having schizophrenia more often. So these were the cognitive factors that are important in prejudice and then later discriminatory behavior. And in cognitive factors, we talked about categorization of people, and usually that categorization is based on either gender or ethnicity. Or ethnicity पे जो categorization है, that is very dangerous, because when we are doing these kind of categorization, then you develop different kinds of stereotypes for people who belong to alien cultures, और इसकी हमने कुछ मिसालें भी देखी. Now we'll be talking about emotional sources of prejudice and discrimination. Here we will be talking about two psychoanalytic theories. One of them is the scapegoat theory, and that theory was presented to explain the displacement of frustration and aggression. So prejudice is viewed by some as displaced aggression onto a group that serves as a scapegoat. Research has shown that when the source is unknown or dangerous, that it is perceived as dangerous, then usually that hostility that a person feels is directed towards some convenient scapegoat. First वर्ल्ड वॉर के बाद ये देखा गया था कि जब जर्मन्स को शिकस्त हुई, तो as a result there was economic depression when they were defeated, and many Germans thought that Jews could be used as a very convenient scapegoat. और टारगेट जो है वो डिफरेंट सिचुएशंस में स्केपगोटिंग के डिफरेंट हो सकते हैं. सो टारगेट वुड वेरी अकॉर्डिंग टू द सिचुएशन. वन जर्मन लीडर एक्सप्लेन्ड दैट द Jew is just convenient. If there were no Jews, the anti-Semitism would have to invent them, and that is quoted by G.W. Alpert, who said it in 1958 on page 325. तो एल्पोर्ट की ये कोटेशन जो है वो हमने ये देखी, और इसमें ये देखा कि वो जर्मन ऑफिसर क्या कह रहा है कि दे विल हैव टू इन्वेंट सम स्केपगोट. अगर ज्यूज ना होते तो वो किसी और को इन्वेंट कर लेते. सो द थिंग इज दैट व्हेन यू पीपल आर फ्रस्ट्रेटेड एंड दे कैन नॉट हैव एन आउटलेट ऑफ देयर फ्रस्ट्रेशन एंड अग्रेशन, देन दैट हॉस्टिलिटी इज turned towards some convenient scapegoat. And there is some evidence that there was more lynching of African American in the years of economic depression after the Civil War in America, and that Civil War was between 1882 to 1930. And that study was conducted by Hovland and Sears in 1940. So they actually showed when there was economic depression after civil wars in America, तो उस वक़्त क्या हुआ, the cotton price became very low, and as a result there was economic depression, and as a consequence of that economic depression there were more killing of black people by white people. So it means they found black people as a very easy and convenient scapegoat. They turned their hostility toward them. One theory which we find compatible with scapegoat theory is realistic group conflict theory. And this is one source of frustration which is competition. ये theory जो है हम डिटेल में जो है वो अगले लेक्चर में पढ़ेंगे. Briefly मैं उसको explain करती हूँ कि realistic group conflict theory says that when people are having competition and the competition is between different groups. So when there is intergroup competition and when the sources are limited, when sources are scarce, then what happens? Then people develop a hostility toward the outer group and then they use them as scapegoat. So the thing is that goal fulfillment of one group becomes the frustration of the other group. आपकी goal जो है वो पूरी हो गई है, you have achieved your goal, but what about the other group? The other group will be frustrated and then the other group's frustration will be used against that group which we are referring to, outer group. एक saying है, whoever is dissatisfied with himself is continually ready for revenge. जो कोई अपने आप से dissatisfied होगा वो revenge के लिए तैयार रहेगा. तो scapegoat is like taking a revenge but finding a convenient scapegoat. The second psychoanalytic theory states that some people have a personality type and those people are specially prone to be prejudiced toward other people. Two people have specially worked on this dimension of psychoanalytic theory. They were Adorno and Frankel Brunswick. They set out to discover how people with certain personality characteristics might be prone to intergroup hostility. Actually, these two researchers fled from Germany and they wanted to find out that what was the psychology behind the mass genocide of Jews and other desirable people by Nazi Germany. And for that, they interviewed a lot of people and they used case histories, surveys and other kind of data to find out what is the authoritarian personality like. And they said that the authoritarian personality is basically characterized by having submission to authority and intolerance of those who are weak. So they identified two kinds of characteristics in an authoritarian personality. One is that authoritarian person will be having a submissive kind of attitude to authority. And the second is they are intolerant of those who are weaker than them. और जैसे मैंने पहले कहा कि उन्होंने ये अथॉरिटेरियन पर्सनैलिटी के बारे में डेटा जो था वो डिफरेंट सोर्सेज से कंपाइल किया था through case histories of different people whom they considered authoritarian, and they also interviewed them, then they surveyed a lot of people and then they concluded about authoritarian personality. And then finally they made a scale to measure authoritarian personality trait, and this scale was made in 1950 by Adorno et al. And that is called the F scale. F से क्या बनता है? Fascist, dictator or authoritarian. So this scale has different questions that how much you are obedient to authority, आप कितना ज़्यादा submissive हैं authority की तरफ, आप कितना ज़्यादा उनकी बात easily मान लेते हैं, what is your viewpoint for people who are weaker than you, etc. So the result of their study was that basically authoritarian personality is due to childhood experiences and due to personality conflict that a person or a child would have with significant others in his childhood, and also they found out that it is due to harsh child rearing practices by the parents. यानी एक बच्चा जो है अगर उसके साथ treatment जो है वो बहुत harsh है, during the early years of development there is more chances that that child would develop into an authoritarian personality. Then more work was started on this issue, that whether harsh childhood experiences and personality conflict would lead a person or a child to become later an authoritarian personality or not. And in 1980s, more work was done from social learning perspective. And the person who did majority of work on social learning theory regarding this dimension was Altemeyer. He worked on this dimension of authoritarian personality in 1981, and then he elaborated his work more in 1988. He suggested that the authoritarian personalities are caused by people learning a prejudicial style of thinking during adolescence. So he concluded that it is not essential that authoritarian personality could emerge from childhood experiences and through harsh child rearing practices, but it could emerge during adolescence. And how it could emerge during adolescence, when people would be living and would be modeling authoritarian people. And if you are as an adolescent socializing with those people who are authoritarian and who are exhibiting authoritarian style of personality, then through reinforcement and through modeling you are supposed to learn all these characteristics. अब आप ये देखें कि learning theory जो है वो basically क्या कहती है? Learning theory says that you could model this kind of behavior, or whatever kind of behavior you would model from significant others, from people who are older than you, who are important in your life, and then you could be also learning through reinforcement. आपको याद होगा कि स्किनर ने रिवॉर्ड और पनिशमेंट का कॉन्सेप्ट पेश किया था इन learning theory. So later researchers also agreed with that we could learn authoritarian kind of behavior in our adolescence. So studies conducted over the past 20 years have supported social learning perspective, and one of the study was conducted by Duckett and Fisher in 2003. So this was all about today's lecture. Now let's review what we have studied today. We talked about prejudice and discrimination in today's lecture, and we discussed the difference between discrimination, prejudice and stereotypes. And before that we also talked about certain pronouns which differentiate us and other people. और हमने ये देखा कि इंग्लिश में different pronouns use होते हैं to differentiate and to distance between us and other people. For example, they, them, us, we. इसी तरीके से उर्दू में हम यूज़ कर सकते हैं हम, हमारा, वो, उनका. और हमने ये देखा कि जब हम दूसरे ग्रुप को बयान करते हैं तो यूजुअली हम एक नेगेटिव टर्म में बोलते हैं, and we say different kind of statements when we are expressing out group. For example, we say they are disrespectful, they are dangerous, they are not honest, they are not good people. इसी तरीके से उर्दू में हम कहते हैं कि वो अच्छे लोग नहीं हैं, हम उनसे नहीं मिलना चाहते. So उन, उस और वो has been used to describe in pronouns people who belong to out group. Usually these people who are they are not good people, but sometimes they could be good people, but one thing is that they are not like us, they are different from us. And then these people who are belonging to out group, they are sometimes, it's not essential that we always are negative toward them. Sometimes we feel sorry for them, but again we want to make it clear that we don't want them around us. और हम ये भी अंदाज़ा लगाते हैं कि these people who belong to out group, they are all alike, and this is about the out group homogeneity effect. और हम ये समझते हैं कि जो हमारा ग्रुप है, we are diverse, but we are not like them, or they are not like us. Then we talked about the definitions of prejudice, discrimination and stereotypes. Actually, stereotypes provide basis for prejudice, and we discussed that prejudice is an active component in that. We evaluate people and how we like or dislike other people. So prejudice is basically about our attitude toward outgroup, our different people, our different social groups. As compared to that, discrimination refers to our biased behavior toward other social groups. और जैसे मैंने पहले कहा कि stereotypes provide a basis for both prejudice and discrimination. Stereotypes are our negative beliefs about out group or other social groups. Basically हम prejudice किसी की तरफ develop कैसे करते हैं, ये आज के lecture का दूसरा topic था. So there are different sources of prejudice and discrimination. we talked about three categories of sources of discrimination and prejudice. One was cognitive sources, the other was emotional sources, and the third was social sources. सोशल सोर्सेज का जिक्र हम अगले लेक्चर में करेंगे. आज हमने कॉग्निटिव और इमोशनल सोर्सेज की बात की. एज फार एज कॉग्निटिव सोर्सेज आर कंसर्न, बेसिकली while we are thinking about other people, we categorize them into groups. Basically categorization जो है, that is not a bad thing, because to perceive our world in an organized and consistent way, we want to organize things into groups. और हमने ये डिस्कस किया कि जिस तरह से जो बायोलॉजिस्ट है वो क्लासीफाई करता है प्लांट्स को और एनिमल्स को डिफरेंट ग्रुप्स में, सिमिलरली साइकोलॉजिस्ट क्लासीफाई पीपल इनटू डिफरेंट ग्रुप्स. यूजुअली फॉर कैटेगराइजिंग, sex and ethnicity are widely used. Then we talked about different countries who are multicultural, and we discussed that how different stereotypes could be developed in people who are living in those countries for those people who are considered to be alien cultures. और हमने ये भी बात की कि पाकिस्तान में हमारे बहुत सारे कल्चर्स नहीं हैं. एथनिसिटी के ज़मन में बात कर रही हूँ, वैसे तो एक कल्चर के अंदर बहुत सारे कल्चर्स होते हैं, बट वी टॉक्ड दैट on the basis of categorization, we have different Zaat Bradri systems here, and we identify people with the labeling of Zaat and Bradri. Then we talked about emotional sources of prejudice and discrimination, and we talked about two psychoanalytic theories. One is scapegoating and the other is authoritarian personality. Scapegoating is usually done when we are having a threatening source, and sometime when we do not know who is threatening us and we are not clear about that. So when the threatening source is there or the source is unknown, usually our hostility is directed toward some source which is convenient for us for scapegoating, और हम अपना गुस्सा जो है वो उसकी तरफ ट्रांसफ़र कर देते हैं. आपने आम जिंदगी में देखा होगा कि बॉस की अगर झिड़कियाँ पड़ी तो घर आके जो है वो शख्स जो है वो जिसको झिड़कियाँ पड़ी हैं वो बीवी को डांटता है या बच्चों को मारना शुरू कर देता है. तो ये एक छोटी सी मिसाल है आम जिंदगी में स्केप कोटिंग की. तो स्केप कोटिंग जो है उसके ऊपर काफ़ी रिसर्च हुई वर्ल्ड वॉर 1 के बाद, वर्ल्ड वॉर 2 के बाद, दैट हाउ पीपल, स्पेशली दोज हु वर जर्मन्स, हाउ दे यूज्ड Jews एज कन्वीनियंट स्केप कोटिंग. उसके बाद दूसरा फैक्टर जो था विच हैज़ बीन क्वाइट frequently studied, and that is that prejudice could exist as a personality factor. And studies have shown that people who have an authoritarian personality, they could have more prejudice toward people, and later on they would have more discriminatory attitude. Studies have shown that due to your harsh child rearing practices and due to personality conflicts in childhood, you could become a person who could later develop into an authoritarian personality. So studies have concluded that authoritarian personality could emerge from your childhood experiences and through your threatening experiences with your significant others. Lekin later theories, especially studies which have been conducted in the previous 20 years, they have found out that social learning is very important in the development of authoritarian personality. And they found out that through the result of reinforcement and modeling, people in adolescence could learn authoritarian traits, and that later they could be developed into an authoritarian personality. So this was all the review about the lecture that we have studied today. And in the next lecture, we will be talking about social sources of prejudice and discrimination. And among social sources, we will be talking about inequality between different groups, and at the same time we'll be talking about competition between different groups. Until then, Allah Hafiz.